Greetings again, everybody. So we continue with Īśvara and yoga and my message. So the first class was accidentally cut into two, which is in the media gallery under, I believe, lecture 20, Īśvara and yoga, and then I put part 1, and then lecture 20, Īśvara and yoga, part 2. I made a mistake when I was doing part 1, and I wanted to bring the text up, and I hit the stop button instead of the pause button. So that then became fractured and became a separate entity. So that's only 4 or 5 minutes, and then the class is whatever it was, an hour and 15. So together that's one class. Today, this is the second class on Īśvara and yoga, after which then we begin the Gita, which of course is now one of the great classics, as is the Yoga Sutras. But the Yoga Sutras is more, is of more interest to those practicing yoga. Asanas and doing teacher training courses in yoga has a slightly more specialized readership, whereas the Gita is just one of the great books in the world now. So, anybody interested in religious studies or it's the religious traditions, it's kind of like the Gita is it's taken the status almost of the Bible of India, but it's not that. We should not correlate it with that for reasons that we'll discuss when we introduce the Gita, but it's sort of the placeholder. It's become the sort of main canonical text, not just for the yoga community, but sort of the representative of the sort of the Hinduism. Right, that will be next week. We'll talk more about that. And we finish up now with the Yoga Sutras. We're only focusing on Īśvara, and we'll see that Īśvara's role in the Yoga Sutras is sort of secondary to the primary role, which we discussed in the last lecture discussion, and that is that really yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, the stilling of the mind completely. Remember, closing out the world out there, stilling of the mind. And then the idea is when there are no objects of consciousness because you've blocked out the world by closing down the senses, number one. And then, you can close out the world out there and internalize, but then you've got this internal world raging away in your mind. Your thinking is churning away. So that still is, consciousness is still wrapped up in that. Remember, thinking is not in the soul in the yoga tradition, unlike in Christianity or Platonic and a lot of Greek thought that the soul is the thinking entity. Not so in yoga. Yoga dualism is different from Cartesian dualism, Christian dualism, Platonic dualism. How so? How is it different? Because in those dualisms, obviously I'm painting with very broad brushstrokes here, but in those dualisms, the dualism is between, on the one hand, thinking, the mind and the soul and consciousness and thinking. On the one hand, that's the sort of non-material substance entity. On the other hand, there's the world out there, including the body. That's Western dualism, just very simplistically put. Obviously, there's many nuances and then in the way that's understood by different thinkers, but just to make a very basic point, yoga, so put the dividing line, spirit and matter. Yoga, it's only consciousness on this side of the line. Other side, world out there, yes, same as everybody else. Body, yes, same as everybody else, but the mind, the thinking faculty, it's actually a subtle body that wraps around the soul, Atman, first, and then the gross body then molds itself upon the subtle body, according to karma, according to the samskaras of the subtle body, which is really what karma is. But let's not get too sidetracked for now. So therefore, it's just pure consciousness on one side. Okay. And the goal of yoga is to experience that. To experience that, then you close down the world out there. Relatively, you can understand that very simply. You close the senses, internalize consciousness, draw within. But come within now. But what about the mind? The mind seems to be within, but from the point of view of the Atman, it's also outside of the Atman. It's in the body, but it's outside of the Atman. So therefore, the goal of yoga is to still that all thinking, all activities of that inner organ, of the psychic mental organ, the mind, we might say. And that's called the chitta in yoga. And the vrittis are the fluctuations of the mind that has to be still. When that's still, then there's no objects for consciousness to be aware of outside of itself. Then becomes conscious for the first time in beginningless births of its own nature. And then of course Vedanta would say that it finds the bliss, right? Remember the Brihad says that bliss is 10 to the power of 12, and the Taittiriya says it's 10 to the power of 18. They're being rhetorical, but infinitely greater bliss than any temporary ephemeral pleasure that we run after in the world out there. It's in that bliss that we really seek, that is ongoing. It's not temporary. It's not just momentary. It's not like a Kodak moment. Eternal bliss, because the Atman is eternal. So its nature is eternal. If something is eternal, its qualities are eternal. So according to all of these traditions, the Atman is, except for Buddhism, of course, where consciousness is momentary, you may remember, Atman is eternal. Its qualities are eternal. What are its qualities? Consciousness. So it's always conscious, number one, and number two, its other qualities, bliss. Now, yoga doesn't talk too much about bliss, but Vedanta does. We read those passages in the Upanishads about the bliss. I believe we read them, if not anyway. The bliss is 10 to the power of 12 or 18, depending on which Upanishad you read. It doesn't matter what the number is, but infinitely greater. Bliss that is a quality of the Atman when the Atman is absorbed in its own nature, as opposed to when it is absorbed in the other, somehow that bliss does not manifest. Now, exactly why that bliss does not manifest is an issue we don't need to discuss here. Okay, so that's what yoga is. It's the chitta vritti nirodha, stilling of the mind. Sutra number 2, tada drashtu sarupe vastanam. Okay, let's just quickly revisit those verses. We'll go up here. All right, these you're responsible for your quiz. Sutra number 1, this is what's on the syllabus. Now, the continuation of the teachings of yoga. Remember, all the sutras begin with the introduction. What is the sutra going to be about? This Vedanta Sutra is about Brahman. This is about yoga, continuing the teachings. He's not claiming to invent something new. Continuing the old teachings. In last class, we looked at the old teachings in the Upanishads. Okay, this is just a recap. What is that yoga? It's chitta vritti nirodha, stilling of the states of mind. Then what happens to da? What happens? Then the drashtu, another term for Atman. The Atman, the seer, abides in its own nature, swarupa, in its own nature of pure consciousness. This is the real self. This is who we really are, my friends. Bodies are not who we really are. You may, right? Even in this life, your bodies change. You were a baby, and then you were a young person. Now you're young. Now you're adults. Your body's changed. But something about you, your mind may have changed. Your ideas have changed. Your feelings have changed. But there's something about you that's the same. And that's why you can look at a picture of yourself as a baby and say, that was me. Well, what is it that was you? Because the body isn't the same, and the mind isn't the same. So something is the same. Yoga would say that's the deepest level of consciousness. That consciousness that was conscious of the baby body, I'm wanting to whatever, the mother's breast, conscious of whatever it was conscious of as a tiny baby. That same consciousness that a little bit older is conscious of its toys and its playthings. And a little bit older becomes a teenager, is conscious of whatever school and boyfriends and girlfriends, and then comes to college and is conscious of exams and graduating, and then will become conscious of job market, and then become conscious of family and home, and then get old and become conscious of the body getting old, and then ultimately will be lying on the deathbed being conscious of that moment. That consciousness is the same, but the external situation is different. The body has changed, it becomes older, the mind has changed, the ideas change, ideologies change. You can change your religion, change everything, mental and conceptual. But the consciousness itself is not changed, only its objects. So yoga is about, what is that conscious? That's the self. Because these other things have gone. Where's the baby you? It's gone. If that baby was really, really you in a kind of fundamental, ontologically real sense, well, give it to me then. Show it to me. No, it's gone. You can't produce this. In that sense, it's not real because it's past. ingredients of that baby body have whatever it is. Those chemicals have recycled, those atoms have recycled in some sort of way, right? Doesn't the body change entirely every 7 years, something like that? All the atoms of the body change. What is it safe to say? This is what yoga is urging us to consider. Actually, Vedanta is urging us to consider that. Yoga is saying, okay, have you considered it? Did you read your Vedanta? Now we're going to give you a method to experience it. And that method is to close everything out. Just block everything that is not consciousness, including the mind, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Still the mind. Then consciousness can be aware of its own nature. And that's where we left off. And if it's not aware of its own nature, it's trapped in the mind. We're constantly trapped in our thoughts, our thinking, our feelings, our willings, our desires, our anxieties, our insecurities, our depressions, all of that. Then we discussed the 5 vrittis. Remember, right knowledge, wrong knowledge, metaphoric thinking, time flies, deep sleep, and memory. Okay, now you may have asked, well, where's Īśvara in all this? Isn't this a course on Īśvara? And here now, in this class, we will connect Īśvara to that. But hopefully it's very clear now what the actual goal of yoga is. Experience of one's own deep consciousness. Bhakti, it's going to be that, yes, experience of your own Atman, absolutely, but Bhakti is much more interested in, now you've discovered your own Atman, what about the Supreme Atman? What about Īśvara? What's the relationship between your Atman and Īśvara? Also known as Bhagavan, that's how we get the term Bhagavad Gita, is really the Gita of Bhagavan. The N becomes a D because of Sanskrit grammatical rules. That's the relationship. That's next week. But so what's Īśvara's role here then? Well, Patanjali introduces Īśvara for the first time in verse 23. Or Va. That goal of yoga, of experiencing pure consciousness, Drashtu Sarupe Vastanam, Sutra 3. That goal can be attained by pranidhana, surrender to Īśvara. Īśvara can bestow that goal. So it's kind of a bhakti. Bhakti means devotion. The grace of God. God can give you that experience of the innermost self. Now, many of the bhakti traditions are going to say that that's not the grand finale goal. That's not the end goal. You know, realizing your own self is a wonderful and grand and noble thing, but there's a supreme self. So the ultimate goal is to realize God. Patanjali doesn't take us there. But there is God here. So this is an Īśvaravada tradition. It's a theistic tradition. Okay, we've looked at non-theistic traditions near Īśvaravada. No, there's no Īśvara. That's Mimamsa, Jains, Buddhists. We looked at the arguments, all of the arguments. I'm sure you've had your fill of them. Yoga is Īśvaravada. It accepts Īśvara. So then it introduces Īśvara. Who is this Īśvara? Purusha, I don't know if you've had this term. There's many terms for Atman. One of them is Purusha. One is the seer. There's lots of synonyms. Just like in English, you say soul, you can say self, you can say innermost being. There's lots of ways of referring to deep level self. You know, even in religious traditions, there are different terms. So one here is Purusha, and that's the term that's favored in Sankhya. And it's the term that's favored in, I'm going to put my microphone on, and it's the term that's favored in Sankhya and Yoga. Okay, remember some Sankhya traditions are non-theistic, not all of them, because the Gita is Sankhya, it's theistic, lots of theistic Sankhya, but we actually looked at the Yukta-Dipika, we looked at a non-theistic Sankhya. As one of our 5 non-theistic schools. But yoga is theistic. Yoga is a branch of Sankhya. The 6 schools of philosophy. Later periods, that yoga and Sankhya become 2 distinct schools. So out of the 6 schools of Indian philosophy, Vedanta and Mimamsa, we know, and Nyaya, we know. One we haven't really touched on, Vaisheshika, don't worry about. The other 2 are yoga and Sankhya. That's just that system of 6 schools. It's not more than 1,000 years old, which is nothing in Indian time. Less than that. few centuries old. But in older times, going back to, let's say, the Gita, the Mahabharata, going back to the big, prior to the Common Era, Sankhya Yoga were one school. But we don't have to worry about that. Or I've said all that because yoga is very much an Īśvara tradition, even though some schools of Sankhya are non-theistic. So who is this Īśvara? Well, he's a special Purusha, Purusha Vishesha. So he is a soul. What does that mean to be a soul? It means he's a being made of consciousness. Remember Nyaya, doesn't have a material body. Although Vaishnavas, when we get to the Gita, we'll maybe talk about this more, we'll say God has a spiritual body. Remember the arguments against God having a body? And the mom said, well, if you got a body and the body's made of matter, well, how can you have a body made of matter if matter hasn't been created yet? How can the creator create without a body? And if he has a body, then he's already created, then, hasn't he? And if he hasn't created yet, he can't have a body because bodies are made of matter. You need a body to sort of bring to contact. If you're going to bring the atoms together to form creation, there has to be contact with the atoms. That's the argument. That recycles a fair bit. It's borrowed from one school to the other. Now, Vaishnavas, the Vishnu traditions will say, no, God has a body, but it's not material. It's spiritual. And therefore, but let's not worry about that now. So what does it mean that he's a Vishesha Purusha, special kind of Purusha? Purusha means conscious. He's a conscious being, but he's special. How's he special? It's different from us. We're also Purushas. Remember, Purusha means Atman. We're also Purushas, but he's a special Purusha. So God is a conscious being. We're conscious entities, and God is a conscious entity. But obviously, God is going to be different from us. Otherwise, we will be gods. In which case, the word God loses its meaning. So, how is Īśvara a special kind of being? Well, the first thing Patanjali says is aparam rishta, never been affected, never been touched by what? Kleshas. Kleshas means ignorance, ego, desire, aversion, right? The things that we're in ignorance. What does ignorance mean? We think we're body mind. We're ignorant of the fact that we are Atman. So when ignorance is used in yoga, Vedanta, all of these texts, all these traditions, this word ignorance is used a lot. It doesn't mean ignorance. It's not a sort of, insult, oh, you're ignorant. It means someone who thinks they're body mind and they're ignoring the fact or unaware of the fact of vidya. They don't see, they don't have knowledge of the fact that they're really Atman. Īśvara is not like that. He's not subject to ignorance and the karma. And therefore, karma, when you make action reaction, that law is predicated on ignorance. In other words, it's because we think we're body mind, then we go out into the world and trying to find happiness through body mind. And when we do that, we generate action reaction karma. So karma is a sort of a secondary phenomena, a secondary sort of rule, really, cause and effect system that is built upon the notion of ignorance. When we're enlightened, we can act in the world, but we act with no desire, no personal desire. We act to serve others. We act in the service of God, no personal desire. Then there's no karma. That action, well, it has a reaction, but it's a good reaction. That kind of enlightened action burns pre-existing karma. Actually, part of that kind of action burns up pre-existing karma. So, but Īśvara doesn't have any karma. He's never under ignorance. He's never subject to any rules. He's not subject to any rules. He, in fact, creates the rules. He certainly does in the Gita. I would say, well, the rules are eternal and Īśvara is eternal, but still he's not subject to them. So they're different theisms. Don't think all of the Īśvara traditions are identical. They're not. But anyway, now we're focusing on the yoga. What does yoga say about Īśvara? He's a special Purusha. How is he special? Aparam rishtaha. So he's not like the Buddha or somebody like that was once in ignorance. Buddha has, there's a whole series of texts about the Buddha called the Jatakas, the previous lives of the Buddha before he became enlightened. The story is well known. And all his past lives are recorded according to the tradition. And then even in the life of the Buddha, he starts off as a prince in ignorance. And then he sets out to find enlightenment and is very fascinating story and eventually finds enlightenment. So, but the point is, he was once in ignorance. Īśvara is not like that. It's never been. Aparamrishnam is a past passive participle, has never ever been subject to ignorance. And therefore, he's never been subject to ignorance and desire and ego, and therefore has never made karma, has never been subject to this force of karma, because clearly he's a supreme being. Right, so this is the first important verse. Īśvara may be a Purusha, maybe a conscious being like us. But how is he different? The first difference that Patanjali points to is he's never been subject to karma or to ignorance and the sort of consequent and subsequent karma. Number one. How else is he different? Number two, verse 25, Sutra 25. Tatra nirati shayam sarvajna bijam. The seed of omniscience is unsurpassed in Īśvara. Īśvara knows everything. Remember, Nyaya argues that in order to, if you make a product, you're a producer and you want to make, let's say you make a table. So you want to produce a product, and the product you want to, or a pot, we can go with a pot, because that's the classic example. So you're a potter and you want to make a pot. Well, you have to know the ingredients of the pot. You have to know clay, you have to know where it's found, you have to know how to work the wheel, the potter's wheel. You have to know how to push your thumb in you have to put the lump of clay, you have to know which is the right kind of clay for pots. You have to know the material. If it's the wrong clay, pot will fall apart. You have to get the right clay, you have to put it in a bowl, you stick it on your wheel, you have to know how to pump the wheel. You get your stick and you push it in the middle to make the hole. You have to know how to make it nice and thin. You have to know everything about the material ingredients of your product. This is a prerequisite of production. If you don't know, then your product will not emerge. You will not produce a product. Your product will fail, unless it's a fluke or luck, but normally it will fail. So it's a reasonable principle that a producer needs to know the material ingredients, the things that are going to put together. You make a table, you need to know what the legs are, the hinges are, the screws are, the material ingredients. You need to know about them. Otherwise, you won't be successful. And since the world is a product of parts brought together systematically and non-haphazardly, there must be an intelligence behind it, and that intelligence must know the ingredients. And since he must know the ingredients of the entire universe, because he's put the entire universe together, then he must know everything about the universe. Well, that's one way of thinking of omniscience, omni, all, sio in Greek, to know. He must know everything, omniscient. So here then, the verse Sutra 25, Īśvara is the seed of sarva jñā, to know sarva, everything, that seed of omniscience, nir atishayam, no one can surpass it. Now, why does he frame it like this? No one can surpass it. Why can he just say he's omniscient? Well, the yoga tradition in chapter 3, if you are interested in this, you can scroll down to chapter 3. It has a whole chapter of mystic powers, mind over matter type powers, right? We've all heard about mind over matter and how, if you go online and type in Uri Geller, for example, he was famous in the 60s. He would come on the talk shows and seemed to be, he was subject to, some considerable scientific scrutiny. It seemed to be the case that the interviewer could hold a metal spoon and this Uri Geller, I think his name is Geller or Gallagher or something like that, Uri something, I think he was Israeli. He could bend it just by mind power. If you were interested in that, I'm sure we could find something on YouTube. Uri, if I got it wrong, it's something like Geller. So that's a tiny little yogic power from the point of view of chapter 3 of the Yoga Sutras. But the Yoga Sutras will claim in chapter 3 that yogis, their consciousness can expand and actually almost penetrate the whole universe, because what's keeping consciousness trapped in the body is, well, we didn't really discuss the kleshas of yoga. So I'm not going to get into it now, because I'm going to keep focusing on Īśvara. But let me give you an example. Let's accept the Yoga, Vedanta, Sankhya, Buddhist, all these traditions will say that, well, Buddhism, let's bracket that because it has a different sort of understanding of consciousness. As we know, it's momentary, although there is some overlap in many ways. But Buddhists also accept mystic powers. But let's not complicate things. And these traditions all accept reincarnation. And let's say my Atman in its subtle body. Remember, the Atman is always trapped in the subtle body, which is the mind. Let's say it takes birth as an ant. So consciousness now pervades the body of the ant. It's conscious of the little ant body. It sees as far as the ant eyes allows it to see. I'm not sure if ants hear, because some creatures have only one sense like plants. Some creatures only have two senses like earthworms. They can't see, and they can't smell, and they can't hear. So karmically, they only have consciousness has only two outlets to be aware of the world in an earthworm. Ants have three. I'm not sure if they can hear. It doesn't matter. The point is, consciousness is pervading the little ant's body now, and only aware of that. You only see as far as an ant's eyesight allows it to see. If it does hear, and I don't think it does, but let's say it did, it would only hear as far as its hearing apparatus allows it to hear. All right, now let's say get the point. Now, the ant dies, and it's because of karma, it becomes an elephant next, right? So it has to burn up a little karma. Remember, karma is only made in the human form. Animals don't make karma because they're not moral agents. They have no ability to distinguish right from wrong. They're driven by instinct. So they're not moral agents. They're not responsible for their actions because they're forced to act, right? By what we call instinct. And yoga would say the samskaras, the imprints of things they did in the past human life. Now, ant dies, becomes an elephant. That same Atman that was in the body of the ant with the same subtle body. Now the subtle body sort of reconfigures a bit. Different samskaras are activated in the subtle body, and other samskaras are pushed down into what Freud would call the unconscious, subconscious, into sort of latency. Atman now takes the body of an elephant. Now its consciousness now expands because the elephant's conscious of its legs and its nose. So that means the consciousness now is filling up the body of the elephant, and its its subtle body is filling up the body of the elephant. So what does that mean? It means and vice versa. The elephant could die and become an ant. So that means consciousness, because not the soul. Soul doesn't change, but its power of consciousness, just like light, it can just keep flowing until it's blocked by a wall, let's say, or the environment, or the planet, atmosphere. So consciousness is like that. It could actually be infinite. There's nothing to stop it. Like light, nothing stops it till it bumps into something. That's why we talk about light traveling billions of years. Nothing interferes with it, just keep flowing out. Consciousness is like that, my friends. So what blocks it? Well, because of karma, then the consciousness is trapped in a body. So then at 1 minute it's trapped in an ant's body, one birth, next birth, elephant body. But even in between those two bodies, we've seen how consciousness can expand, and then it gets trapped by the contours of the elephant body. So an advanced yogi who is able to break the bonds of ego has gone beyond karma and the bonds of karma that keep it trapped. Such a yogi, stop that yogi's consciousness and also psychic body, but I don't want to get into the difference between the psychic body now. It's not a course for that. I just want to make this point. I want to connect all this to this verse about Īśvara. That yogi's then consciousness can, well, chapter 3 of Patanjali, take it or leave it. I'm just telling you what the text says. You can do what you want with this proposal or this claim. But the highly developed yogi's consciousness can expand far beyond what our normal frame of reference is. You and I, what to speak of the bugs and the ants, their consciousness is very limited. Human consciousness can expand, right? We can see further, hear further, we conceptualize further. We can conceptualize your big bangs and dark matter and our awareness of the universe, even though we might not perceive it all. We can make inferences, right? Because dark matter is an inference. So, but still, that's a way of knowing. Remember the 3 ways of knowing. One is to see the fire, one is to infer. It's not as powerful as seeing. It's still a way of knowing. And hearing, being taught things, that's a way of knowing. Not as powerful as either of the previous 2, less direct, a way of knowing. So the yogi's consciousness can then penetrate much further out And Vedanta is going to say in very, very high cases can actually pervade the whole universe. The claim is that it's possible through yoga to be pretty much omniscient. Now, that's why Patanjali says in 25, Īśvara is not like that. His omniscience is of a completely different nature. So it's not just that he's some kind of a high-level yogi. And Vedanta is going to say, we didn't read that verse, but the Vedanta Sutra is going to say, and it's going to pick up on, resonate with this discussion here. And Vedanta is going to say, well, the difference between even the highest possible attainment by yoga, the greatest yogi of all time, Īśvara is different because Īśvara can create a universe. A yogi can never do that. Right? Maybe have some mystic powers, might be able to walk on water, might be able to, rearrange material things in a way that looks like magic, that looks like mystical power. And the whole of chapter 3 is about these mystical powers. You can't walk on water. You master your life forces, and you can sort of levitate. All kinds of cool things if you want to read chapter 3 and encounter some of those. But Īśvara is on another level. So therefore, according to yoga, no one can become Īśvara. Īśvara is a different kind of soul, a supreme soul, right? And all that is packed into these 6 words. And then, of course, we read the commentaries, and they will take the discussion further. Oh, sorry, this verse here. So he's a special Purusha, never been affected by karma, by ignorance, klesha. Just for now, let's just take that as ignorance. Here I've got it, the obstacles to the practice of yoga. What are the obstacles? Ignorance. You're not going to practice yoga to realize the Atman if you're ignorant of the Atman. Right, then you wouldn't practice yoga in the first place, right? Because yoga is that which takes you to the Atman. If you're not interested in the Atman or never heard of the Atman or reject the Atman, then you wouldn't do yoga. So this Īśvara can give you that experience of the Atman. Let's call it samadhi, because that's what the text calls it, samadhi. Okay. Now, so then who is this Īśvara that can do that? Who's this Īśvara that can give you the goal of yoga, that can bestow it upon you? Well, he's verse 25 is verse 24, he's not like you and I, he's never been affected by karma or ignorance. Verse number 25, he's supremely omniscient. His omniscience is not like that of some very powerful yogi, way beyond that. 26, Purveshamapi Guruhu Kalena Navachedat. He's the guru of the ancients. Guru means a teacher. So there's a sense that now we have a new kind of, we have some new feature of guru that up to now, Nyaya and Vedanta have just argued that there must be an Īśvara. Haven't said much about the nature of Īśvara. Right? We're going to get a lot of that in the Gita, because then Krishna's going to say, I am Īśvara. And then we'll get a lot of the qualities, we'll get a much richer sense of who is this Īśvara, what are some of his qualities that, up to now we've just sort of been playing with this idea that there must be an intelligent something behind creation. There must be intelligence, right? There must be a producer. And Nyaya hasn't said anything about the nature of that producer, just that there must be an intelligent being. And again, also Ramanuja in the Vedanta, yes, there must be an intelligent being. We can know that, like Nyaya. Ramanuja says, yes, we can know it through inference, but we don't know its nature. Only revelation can give us its nature. Well, in the Gita, Krishna is going to reveal, chapter 4, I am Īśvara. Right? Īśvaro Son, Prakritin Swamadhishtaya. I am the Supreme Īśvara. I incarnate age after age. We'll get all that in the Gita. Just throwing out a few tidbits there to keep you interested in the course now, since we're getting towards the end of the semester. Okay? So he's the guru of the ancients. How can you be the guru of the ancients? Aren't the ancients dead? Aren't they gone? Right? You can't be the guru of, the old Egyptians or the ancient Egyptians or the ancient Africans or 5th century Chinese or, the 16th century Indians. We can't be gurus of them because they're gone. Well, because we're living now, right? We're alive now. We weren't alive then. So how could we be gurus or teachers of past generations? Well, what about if the Īśvara is an eternal being? He's a Purusha, special. Purusha means an eternal entity. And he's beyond the klesha and karma, so he's beyond Prakriti, he's beyond the laws of matter. So how about we call him transcendent? Because that's what transcendent means. To transcend, to be beyond, to go beyond, to be not subject to laws of matter. Let's call him a transcendent being. And if you're transcendent to matter and you're eternal, well, you can intervene anytime, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and you can impart knowledge, because that's what gurus do. A guru is one who imparts knowledge. The definition of a guru means heavy. Heavy with what? With knowledge. So therefore, there are two pieces of information here. One, that Īśvara is connected to the world. It's not just some creator that winds up the world like a clock. You wind up the clock and then that's it. You leave it, you walk away, you don't need to touch it anymore. It's wound up. Not that kind of an Īśvara, right? Which the deists would say. The deists are sort of a branch of post-enlightenment theism in the West that were kind of romantics, but for them, God was just the clock maker, and he didn't, once he made the clock and set it up, and it just goes by itself. And that way they were able to combine the discoveries of science with God. They wanted to preserve God, but science was taking over many of the things usually associated with God, right? That God was needed to intervene in human affairs, and science was showing, no, we don't have to say positive God intervening. Matter can explain itself. You know, Darwinism, that previously was thought, well, there must be a God, right? That creates the species, keeps them distinct. Darwinism was very came along and said, no, we don't need a positive a God. We have another principle that accounts for the differences in species, and that's natural evolution. So now God's job, one of the jobs that God had, and he was always a creator for everybody accepts God as creator, but in the Western understanding, he created the species and kept them separate. Well, Darwinism couldn't deny the claim that God was an original creator. He could. The Darwinistic evolutionary theory could explain how species came to be without requiring the intervention of God. That was a big blow for theistic thinkers in the West. So Īśvara is not, so therefore deism emerges and says, okay, we'll accept all that, but there's still a God. He had to set it up in the first place. He set it up and he set it up so evolution will just evolve on its own. Fair enough. He doesn't intervene, but we need someone to set it up in the first place. Okay, and you're never going to be able to deny that position. Whatever science discovers, it can never deny the possibility that even if you let's go with Big Bang, you can never deny. The theists are going to say, well, what made it bang? What was before Big Bang? What created that setup? Whatever that infinitely dense moment was, who triggered that bang? So you're never going to be able to deny God a role in that sort of way. But what science can do and has been doing is to deny the necessity of God once creation starts, because you can explain the evolution after Big Bang, and that everything that comes to be, you can explain that perfectly adequately, just with natural explanations of forces of particles and forces and the evolution of matter and of the species. Okay, so all of that is to say, but Īśvara is not like that in the traditions. He periodically comes. Okay, obviously ancient Indians knew nothing about evolution, so we can't really say anything about their views on evolution because they didn't. I mean, Darwin was what, 1860? It's less than 200 years, even in the West. So it's like saying, what does Aristotle and Plato or medieval theologians or Descartes or Western thinkers think about evolution? If they're before Darwin, they wouldn't have an opinion because they hadn't had to respond to it. So since Darwin, that theistic thinkers have had to figure out how to preserve theism, how to keep a role for God in a Darwinistic worldview. Okay, but anyway, so here then, Īśvara is the guru of the ancients, and the guru is one who teaches. So we get the sense that Hindus never had a problem with God coming in other traditions. Never thought only through Krishna or only through this prophet can you reach God. Never thought like that. They always assumed that the infinite God must have infinite forms and interact with people in infinity of ways, and that different teachings were appropriate at different times in human society. It's not just one set of teachings to everybody. People are different. They have come into different cultures and communities and different lifestyles, different ways of thinking, bringing different karma. And so therefore God appears in a form appropriate to time and place. They never had this idea of just one manifestation of God and one law for all of humans. That they would think that was really a very limiting way of thinking. That the unlimited God must appear unlimitedly. There must be an infinity of manifestations and forms of God, and plurality of teachings. So the guru of the ancients, not just one ancient culture, but all the ancients. So Hindus never had a problem with Jesus Christ, for example, being a son of God. They respected Christ. They didn't like the missionaries telling them Christ was the only way. That they totally thought was a childish idea. How childish it is to think that God has only one son. That they rejected completely. It's just foolishness. But they very much respected Jesus Christ. They thought he was a real yogi, actually. They thought he was a very enlightened and a very advanced spiritual being. So they didn't have a problem with Jesus. They had a problem with the missionaries telling them that their deities are Satan, and that their forms that they worship, their manifestations that they worship are all, satanic. So that's a different story. So they accepted the idea that Īśvara is the teacher of the ancients, and not just ancient Indians, maybe ancient, Near Eastern folks, ancient Jewish traditions, ancient early Christian, what were to become the Christians. Well, no problem. Why can't Īśvara appear in different parts of the world and impart different teachings, different bodies of knowledge? It's perfectly, if there's an Īśvara, of course Īśvara would do that. Why would he only appear in one people? What about everybody else? What about everybody before? If you're going to say that Īśvara, that God sends only one son in one time, in one place, well, what about everybody earlier? Did they all go to hell? What about people in other countries? What happens to them? And the Christian theologians have had to engage that. And they've come up with different ways, of trying to be rational about that question. Maybe suggesting, well, okay, people that were born before Christ, they had the light of natural theology, and they could still be theists, and they could still be saved. And they came up with whatever ways they came up with to try to sort of be reasonable about the matter. But Hindus never had that problem. They never thought there was one manifestation of God in one place and one time. So he's the guru of all the ancients, and can come, according to Krishna says in Gita, Sambhavami yuge yuge, I come age after age after age I appear to reestablish righteousness. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chatushkirtan dharma samsthapanarthaya. Sanskrit from the Gita. We'll see in chapter 4. We will read that very verse. I come to reestablish dharma age after age. Okay, so here we get a little sense of that. He's the guru of the ancients. Now, what's all this got to do with stilling the mind? What's all this about Īśvara as the guru of the ancients, right? We read in the beginning of the text that yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, the stilling of all churnings of the mind, the stilling of the mind. Well, what's Īśvara got to do with that? Well, the next two verses will connect it all together. Īśvara tasya vachikaha pranavaha. He comes as the sound Om. And I can't remember right now which Upanishads, whether we read, we'll encounter this in the Upanishads in this course, because I teach the Upanishads and taught it this semester in several different contexts. But whether we did or we didn't, doesn't matter. I'll tell you now. We can revisit it if we did, and we can discuss it if we didn't. In the Indian traditions, Īśvara can come in any form. Īśvara can manifest in sound, manifest in stone. That's what an Indian deity is. An Indian deity is a stone representation made according to the descriptions of the that when God incarnates in the world, like Krishna, we'll focus on Krishna because, but of course, there's many incarnations like Rama, and they're not just male, they're female, Lakshmi and Kali and Durga, the wonderful forms of the goddess. These are Īśvari. Īśvara is masculine, Īśvari feminine. So it's not just male gendered. And why does Īśvara have gender? Well, we have gender because we're made in the image of God, right? It says that the way the Hindus would understand that statement of the Old Testament is that, yes, we have gender because God has gender. Everything we have form because God has form. But God's forms are unlimited, they're infinite, they're pure consciousness, they're not limited by matter, they're not subject to laws of karma, they're different. But nonetheless, there's form. And Īśvara always has Īśvari, or most forms of Īśvara has Īśvari. So Radha, Krishna, Sita, Ram, Lakshmi, Narayan, Shiv, Parvati. Right? Because then this sort of union allows to enhances love. Infinity of love can be enhanced infinitely more than infinity. If that sounds like a contradiction, well, good. Because once we go beyond our little world of space and time and cause and effect, then we can say things like the infinite being's infinite bliss increases infinitely. We can say things like that, even though they don't make sense in our frame of reference. Because something's infinite, how can it increase anymore? It's infinite already. Well, when we deal with Īśvara in the devotional traditions, the bhakti traditions, we'll get a sense of them in the Gita. Yes, you can. The infinite can expand even further. And therefore, infinity itself can expand. Just like we say our universe is expanding. So something like that. We have example there, a bit of an example. We think of the universe as more or less infinite, but it keeps expanding. So why can't then the nature of the divine? Because if you say it's infinitely static, it gets some infinite place, or it's an infinite sort of expression of itself. But then it's limited to that level of infinity, or let that. So, but if God is unlimited, then that infinite nature of God must be able to increase infinitely. Okay, so let's not worry about that. I just came, but the point is here is what Īśvara can, even though Īśvara is non-material, can pervade matter. Take the example of an iron bar. Take your iron bar, put it in the fire, leave it there till it's red hot. Now, when that bar is red hot, it's just like fire. Is it really iron anymore? It is. In some sort of way, it still is. But it's now channeling, it's manifesting all the qualities of fire because fire has pervaded it. You take that iron bar out, what is it? It's hot, just like fire. It glows, it's luminous, just like fire. Even though technically, a chemist or a physicist would say, well, it's technically still an iron bar, it's molten, or however they explain it, the atoms or whatever they're doing, jiggling around faster. But the point is, it's channeling, it's manifesting, it's transmitting fire. Fire has pervaded it. So Īśvara can pervade any material substance. So the sound Om is an example. That Om is, okay, in one sense, it's a sound. We hear it with our ears. We vibrate our vocal cords. Om has three, well, actually four, they would say. Om has three visible phonemes, and then they would say there's the state beyond, which is pure consciousness. So Om. So that sacred sound as encapsulating Brahman. We're going to have to connect. What's the connection between Brahman and Īśvara? Well, the Gita will connect. Krishna will say, I am Īśvara and I'm Brahman. They're one and the same thing. The Brahman is just the absolute truth. Vedanta says it's that from which the universe emerges. It's kind of like it's like saying God and the absolute truth. What's the difference? Well, God is the absolute truth. If you're a Christian, or if you're a theist. So it sounds like there's two terms: absolute truth, God. Now, but absolute truth can be, so likewise, Brahman is that the cause of this universe, and for theists, that is God, that is Īśvara. But we'll talk more about that when we get to the Gita, where Krishna will very clearly say, I am Brahman, I am Īśvara. And then that will pull it all together. And when we get to the Gita, then we'll see like Īśvara in real life Hinduism. Hindus don't read the Nyaya Sutras. Hindus don't read Mimamsa arguments against Īśvara. We don't read any of these are scholastic texts. We're doing this, we're in the academy, we're doing a course in philosophy. The average Hindu doesn't read any of the stuff that we've read in this course, my friends. Not just like most Christians don't read the great Christian theologians. They don't read Aquinas and Augustine and the early church fathers, do they? They may read the Old Testament. They're Christians. If they're real practicing Christians, they go to church on Sunday. When they hear something, they hear the sermon of the priest. If you're Hindus, you should go to a church. And if you're non-Hindus in this course, I'm talking to you all, students. If you're from South Asian background, you should go to a Christian service and participate and get a sense of that. How is God worshipped in the Christian tradition? Be open-minded. Be a citizen of the world. And if you're non-Christian, if you're non-Hindus, my friends, those of you who listen to this lecture, go to a Hindu temple. Ask one of your Indian friends to take you if you feel a little unsure of how to behave in a temple. The Indians are very open-minded. They have no problem. As long as you take your shoes off. Take your shoes off outside. Well, if you do that, don't take photos and don't go around in miniskirts. I mean, be sensible. It's obvious things. Don't wear provocative clothing. You have respect for a holy place. You go visit a temple. They're all over the place in New Jersey now because there's so many South Asian communities here. When I drive from Princeton to New Brunswick, I pass like at least half a dozen temples. So that way you get a sense. Now, in real life Hinduism, then, Īśvara is worshipped in the deity. Okay, so the deity is a statue made in, it's not a statue. The statue is what you find in the Colosseum or in Rome or Greece, of statues of the Roman Empire. So it's not like that. It looks like that, but because it's been engaged in a devotional manner, and there's rituals and everything, and deities, that we shouldn't call it statue, we call it a deity. It may be made of marble, but deity means that the devotee requests Īśvara to manifest, so that the devotee can worship and offer worship and build a beautiful temple and bring flowers and make beautiful food offerings and chant and bring the kids and dress up in saris and this is the way of worshiping Īśvara. So now we're getting to a different part of the course. Up to now it's been philosophical, the arguments for and against. But now let's come down to real Hinduism. And most Hindus accept that there is an Īśvara, and then what? They're not interested in philosophical Nyaya, Vedanta. They don't read any of those texts. They're interested in having a personal heart relationship with Īśvara. Let's get a sense of that now for the rest of the course. But not quite ready for that yet. We'll do that much more in the Gita, but for now, we're heading in that direction, that Īśvara manifests as the sound form. This is the primordial sound. It's a sonic incarnation. We've heard of incarnations of God. Krishna is an avatar, as God who manifests in the world, manifests his form. Well, and the deity is another manifestation. Remember the iron bar pervaded by fire. So the deity is a form made of marble, or can be made of anything, brass, any material. At least nine substances are mentioned in the Bhagavata Purana, for example. There's no reason why, including a picture, to be a deity if you approach it that way. And Īśvara can pervade that form. So likewise, sound is a form, right? It's a form. One word has a different word form than another word. If I say Om, that those two Aum is different than if I say boom, because then I've got a B in front of the. So now those are two forms, as sound forms, but we can still think of them as forms. So here's a sonic form. Īśvara comes in the form of form. Okay. Still, I haven't answered the question. What's all this got to do with Chitta Vritti Nirodha at the beginning of the definition of yoga is to still the mind. What's all this talk about Īśvara got to do with that? Here, this verse brings it all together. The japa, the artha bhavana. One does japa. One concentrates. Yoga is stilling the mind. You're still on the mind. We mentioned last class, you got to still it on something. Anything that's going to be still has to be rested on support. Yes? If this piece of paper, right, it's going to just float about unless it's sitting and hits the ground, then it's supported by the ground, or it hits my hand, it's supported by the hand. So it has to be supported by something. If you're going to still the mind, it has to be supported on something. Now, Patanjali says, okay, fix it on anything you want. But here he's very clearly prioritizing the best, clearly spending a lot of time presenting Īśvara as the best support for the mind. And how can the mind be supported by Īśvara? Well, the mind can only grasp material things, can't grasp spiritual things, Atman. The mind can't grasp consciousness, it can know about it. Well, it can grasp the sound form. We can hear it. We say Om and we hear it. So we can then fix the mind on Om. Right? When you sit in meditation, you sit cross-legged, it's the best position. You elongate your backbone, open the chest. Why you do all of this? All of this is described later on in the Yoga Sutras. What's the optimal sitting position? If you want to stay wide awake, because you were trying to concentrate the mind, you don't want to fall asleep, because then that's useless. You fail, and then you're in deep sleep. You're not in a state of altered high-level consciousness. Just sit straight back, open chest, and then you recite the sound Om, and you fix the mind on it. And that's the form of Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Let's go back to the beginning of the sutras, my friends. Here we are, back to chapter 1. Let's see where, here we are. What is yoga? First sutra. Now he's going to teach yoga, right? That's just an introduction, not the Yoga Anushasana. What is yoga? Chitta Vritti Nirodha, the stilling of the fluctuation of thought. You've got to stop that mind churning away and fix it on one thing. That's Om. That comes highly recommended. Patanjali doesn't say that's the only thing you can fix your mind on. True, but he clearly is prioritizing. So mantra meditation is the most common form of Hindu meditation. And the advantage of fixing the mind on Īśvara is, as we find out in chapter 2, here, that Īśvara could, if you fix the mind on Īśvara, then Samadhi sit here. This is 245. It's not on your syllabus. Should have been, but doesn't matter. There's the Īśvara Pranidhana, surrendering to Īśvara. If we do that, if we use Īśvara as fix our mind on Īśvara in the form of mantra, then Īśvara can give us Samadhi. He can give us the goal of yoga. What's the goal of yoga? Is experience of pure consciousness. Okay? So this is Īśvara in the yoga tradition, and there are many forms of Īśvara. Why should there be one form? If God is unlimited, right? We've already established that many traditions claim that God is omniscient, he knows everything. We've heard the word omnipotent, omnipotency has all powers. Yeah, I would say that. He must have all powers in order to create the universe. Well, Bhakti would go further than that. They're not just, because Bhakti's intrinsic, fair enough. Bhakti says, like Ramanuja would say, okay, through inference, you can know there is an Īśvara, but you can't know, that there is intelligence, but you can't know the nature. What if there's two? What if there's a demon? It was this is a mad scientist that created the universe in some other dimension. Like we might be able to create a universe of ants. We might be able to, get a, we do that, right? In our laboratories, we get other beings and we sort of do experiments on them. And some of them are not very nice, monkeys and stuff. The animal rights folks have a right, resist that sort of thing. But you get the point. From the animal's point of view, if we're experimenting on them for our cosmetics and on medicine, and we're injecting things in their eye, awful things we do to monkeys, awful, awful. So what are we then? Evil scientists, from their point of view. They're trapped, right? They can't move, chained, and inject them with stuff. Awful, diabolic. So what if God's like that? So Ramanuja says, we don't know. Only revelation can tell us. So in the Indian tradition, God reveals in these wonderful forms of Krishna and Shiva and Vishnu, and they're beautiful. Because God, if God's omni-everything, omniscient, omnipotent, how about omni-beautiful? He must be completely, stunningly beautiful, but like infinitely more beautiful than anybody. What's beauty other than form? If something beautiful, it has a form. The word beautiful, we don't talk about beautiful smells. Well, we can, but it doesn't really make sense, as much sense anyway. But even then, God's smell is beautiful, it's wonderful. All of the So God must have all of these qualities. And certainly from the point of view of now we'll introduce some bhakti. This is bhakti very light in the Gita, in the Yoga Sutras. It is bhakti, very, very underdeveloped form. And in the Gita, it'll be developed much more. So in the Indian traditions, now I'm giving a little bit of a preamble to the Gita, where we meet beautiful Sri Krishna. God is supremely beautiful. But if God is infinite, it must have not just one form, but an infinity of forms. It's all the same being, but that being must manifest in infinity of forms, because that's what unlimited Godhead means. So how do you find the form of Īśvara that's appropriate for you? That's going to be the Lord of Yoga. Here, verse number 44, the Ishta Devata is the form of the divinity that is Ishta, that captures your heart. How do you find that? Is it Krishna? Is it Kali, the goddess? Is it Lakshmi? Is it Jesus Christ? It could be from some other tradition. As I said, Hindus have no problem with that at all, as long as you don't start telling them there's only one. That, again, they would find that a very limiting way of thinking of the unlimited God. Only one must be an infinity, right? But how do you find that form? It's svadhyaya, from study. You study the different revelations. Ramanuja, remember? Brahma Sutra. We can know there is intelligence, but that's all. We don't know the nature. It only reveal itself. So we have the various revelations of the world, not just India. So by studying those, one then, by dint of that study, you develop an attraction to a particular form. It doesn't mean you reject other forms. You don't become a fanatic, but you accept that God has an infinity of forms, and then you just find yourself attracted to one. It's like in our mundane world. If you want to date somebody, you're looking for a spouse or a husband or a wife, a partner. You date. Eventually, you like to think. You like to imagine that one day there's some special soulmate out there. Of course, yoga would say that's nonsense. There's no soulmate. The only soulmate is Īśvara. But that's another story. But you like to think that you'll meet somebody that will somehow capture your heart. But in principle, everybody's the same. We're all bodies, and we have, we're all human beings. At one sort of level, we're all the same. But there might be one out there that you hope will be special for you. So it's like that with the forms of God. There's one out there and this is bhakti. In principle, that they're all the same form. Hindus will, when it's Krishna's birthday, they worship Krishna. When it's Shivaratri, they worship Shiva. But if they're real bhaktas, they will have one form that is the form of their heart. And you take the mantra of that form. So if it's Krishna, you keep the Om. Remember Patanjali says Om. Om goes back to the Upanishads. But the Om is a seed. The seeds may become a plant or a tree with qualities and fruits and flowers and scents. It takes a very particular, one plant's different from another. So the Om becomes Om Namo Shivaya for the Shiva traditions, Om Namo Narayanaya for the Narayana traditions, for the Krishna traditions, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya for the goddess, Om Durgyai Namaha. So there's many mantras that you will encounter in India that are used to fix the mind. When you do japa, remember what is japa? It's the repetition, and maybe we can discuss that, did we? Let's go back and discuss that. So this Īśvara comes as Om, and then we're getting near the end of our class. This Īśvara who manifests as Om, what do you do with that Om? The next verse, right here. Let's go back to the Om verse. Tasya Vachika Pranavaha. Pranavaha means Om. The Īśvara's Vachika, sound manifestation is Om. Okay, great. What's that got to do with stilling the mind? Japa. Japa is when you very quietly repeat your mantra. With the Om, or if you have a connection with the form of Īśvara, remember Om Īśvara, Om is Īśvara, but if you have not just a vague Īśvara, not just a generic Īśvara, not just Īśvara in principle, but Īśvara is manifest in a particular form that's captured your heart. We will see Krishna as Īśvara in the Gita next week. Then you take that, the mantra of that form. Each form of Bhagavan, of Īśvara, which is also known as Bhagavan, as we'll see next week. But let's stick with Īśvara for now. I don't want to confuse you with too many terms. Next week, I'll introduce another name for Īśvara, which is Bhagavan, just like we have different names for Atman and Purusha. So, your Īśvara that has stolen your heart, that form which has captured your love and your devotion, you chant the mantra of that form. And when you softly repeat it and still the mind on it, so the rules of yoga are the same. You have to close down the senses, block out the world out there. You have to stop the turmoil and fluctuation of thought. All of that we read yesterday, the last class, yesterday's class, the other day. All of that, which is yoga. But how do you still it? You still it on this sound manifestation of Īśvara. And that's called japa, right here in verse 128. So you repeat that japa, you repeat that name, tadartha bhavanam. You're not thinking, you're not praying, you're not talking to God, you're not praying to God, you're just stilling the mind in divine presence. You're completely surrendering. Full faith that Īśvara will take care of everything. No need to pray, no need to ask for anything. Just full faith in Īśvara. Complete surrender. And then then you repeat the name, because that's the most efficient way in Hinduism to directly interact with Bhagavan. Through the Bhagavan is present. We would not say there's a distinction. The mantra does not represent Īśvara. It is Īśvara. You see the difference? The crown represents the king. When you have a crown, it's symbolic of something else, the king. Or a flag represents America, right? So you burn the flag, it's a big sort of offense to the national identity. The flag represents something else. The crown represents something else. The Om does not represent Īśvara in that way. No, Om is Īśvara. It's Īśvara manifest in the form of sound. Right? It's not that Īśvara becomes depleted or limited to sound. No, out of grace, Īśvara just pervades sound and still remains the supreme Īśvara. It's not like, okay, now Īśvara is not running the universe anymore. He's trapped in this mantra. No, nothing like that, obviously. Īśvara can be manifest in an infinity of places and infinity of forms and still be the supreme Godhead. So this is the most common form of Hindu meditation. And here we see now Īśvara in a very different light. Up to now, it's been all philosophical discussions about Īśvara. We spent a lot of the course on that. We are now seeing Īśvara in actual practice, real practice. In yoga, we see practice of meditation. And now, remember, most Hindus don't do this intense meditation. There are plenty who do, but it's a minority. But really, get up in the morning, first half hour, an hour before they do anything else. They take bath, you do this japa. Very few people do that, a small percentage. It's done. I'm not saying it's not done. Most Hindus just people that get up and cook breakfast for their kids and go to work, but they'll go to the temple, when they get a chance, and maybe bring their families, even here in New Jersey. I'm sure some of you are from South Asian backgrounds, so your kids, your parents took you to the temple to try and keep your culture alive. And there you see Īśvara in a different form in the deity, which we'll talk a little bit about. It's not going to be, it's not the main focus of our course. If Īśvara come in sound, it can come in a deity. We've already discussed that. And the deity then is lavishly worshipped in beautiful Swami Narayan temple, for example, right here in New Jersey. If you get a chance to go, I think they're going to build one of the biggest temples in the world. They've already built one temple, and that's very worth a visit if you get a chance in Bridgewater. So now now the rest of the course we're seeing the sort of Īśvara in more kind of real manifest form, rather than just a philosophical principle that you debate about, wait, does it exist, does it not exist? We've done all of that. You've got a sense of the arguments on both sides. Formulate your own opinions, which arguments you feel are more satisfying to you. Here in meditation now, we see Īśvara in a more practical, functional sense, although still a minority, just like only a minority of Hindus engage in theological debates. just scholastics do, theologians do. Now we see Īśvara's presence in the meditational traditions, which again is only a small percentage of Hindus, but it exists. You go to the holy places in India, Rishikesh, there's lots of sadhus, lots of wandering monks, so it's still, this is very much a part of modern day Hinduism, but a minority. If you think there's 1 billion people, or however many of them are Hindus, hundreds of millions, how many are really doing this chitta vritti nirodha practice, completely stilling the mind? A small fraction, significant, but that's not the most common modality of interacting with Īśvara. The most common modality in Hinduism is the temple, and reading the stories. Maybe some of you, when you were kids, you read the Amar Chitra Katha stories. If you're interested in those stories of Sita and Ram, and you don't want to read the Sanskrit texts, even the translations of them, because they're quite large, you can read the comics. What's wrong with that? And now, of course, it's film. More and more of the stories are available on film. I'm waiting for Hollywood and Bollywood to get together and do a first-class, state-of-the-art, $100 million, $500 million movie. Remember Avatar, on that sort of level, with that sort of highest, real technology, on these great stories like the Mahabharata War, which is where the Gita that we read next week is only one little tiny chapter in a huge 100,000 verse epic great war. And I think once that happens, once you do a really state-of-the-art, up-to-date, latest technology film on the Mahabharata, then Hinduism will become cool in the West. I think that's all it's going to take to become really cool. And I hope to live to see that. Hinduism become cool again. It was kind of cool in the 60s, counterculture, and then sort of faded. But I think a good Bollywood, Hollywood combined, Spielberg type level director will really put Indian culture back into the sort of mainstream consciousness of this country in a very cool way. Because Mahabharata's got everything. It's got epic war, it's got love, it's got intrigue, it's got mystic weaponry and all this cool stuff, celestial beings involved in the war and demons, and it's just a fantastic tale. Kingdoms and rivalries and amazing warriors, super warriors. It's got it will enthrall from beginning to end. And just wonderful characters and so forth. Okay, and so people will realize that it's the richness of Indian culture. Otherwise, what? Some Americans think of Indians as what? It just kept the people working in the pharmacy or in Silicon Valley or running, motel patels. The stereotypes, which are natural. It's natural when a culture comes to another country. It takes a while to establish its roots, and of course, that will all happen, and many of you will be a part of that process. Okay, so let's get back to this. Keep our eye on the ball. So Īśvara and yoga, then. Yoga is about stilling the mind, so then Īśvara becomes the object upon which the mind is stilled, and and he manifests in the sound bowl. Okay, and that's all we have for our Īśvara in yoga session. And next week, as you know, will be the Gita, and then the final week, because the Gita is Krishna as teacher. Let's go back here. Remember, he's the guru. Īśvara is the guru. Where is it? Here, verse 26, Īśvara is the guru. So we'll see Īśvara as the guru speaking the Bhagavad Gita on the battlefield to Arjuna. So we see exactly what Patanjali is talking about. Īśvara's guru, we'll see that in the Gita, and so much more. And then in the last week, we're going to see the Krishna of real devotion. Because you don't really, Krishna's Gita, obviously that's a revered figure, but it's not the form of Krishna that is the main form worshipped in Krishna devotion. That's baby Krishna, little Krishna, who incarnates and covers his majesty and playfully plays like a human and steals the hearts of his devotees, very mischievous. And we'll get a sense of that in the last week. Okay, my friends, and we'll have stories from the Bhagavata Purana, right? Next week is Bhagavad Gita, the Song of Bhagavan, the name of Īśvara. Last week, Bhagavata Purana, the same Bhagavan, the Purana, the story that of the story of the incarnation, just like the New Testament is the story of Jesus, the story of Krishna last week. Not just Krishna teaching in the Gita on the battlefield, Krishna's teacher just giving a discourse for an hour and 45 minutes or whatever it takes. Actual, Krishna's apparent birth. Remember, God is never born, he appears to be born. We'll talk about some of that in the last week. That'll be the Krishna, the real Krishna devotion. And that again, and that's how Īśvara is actually real life worshipped and interacted with. Not just Krishna, of course, Rama, these other, we don't have time, we're going to focus on Krishna as a case study, as a sample. But of course, there's the goddess, there's Shiva, there's Vishnu, there's all these infinite forms of Īśvara. Okay, my friends, I look forward to that remaining many sessions with you, and I hope if you found the philosophy portions a bit daunting, good things lie ahead. All right, so well done, you've made it this far. I know some of you just took this course because it's prereq, and so probably just needed to tick a box. Maybe just thought Hindu philosophy was going to be easy, but philosophy is philosophy, my friends, and India is just as intense and rigorous and deep and profound and analytical set of traditions as the West has. And I hope you've got a sense of that. And I hope that's giving you some respect for Indian contribution to world civilization and world thinking. And I think we'll be seeing more and more of Indian philosophy surfacing in our philosophy departments around the world, which tend to be much too Western focus, which I call Western myopia, narrow-minded. So, I hope some of you will be a part of that process, all right? Bringing these traditions into our Western landscape. Okay, have a great day. Looks like the sunny weather is, well, it's a bit of sun out there. So wherever you are, have a great day.